Why is it so hard to handle your child's intense anger and panic, or stay present with the deep hurt that they feel when they're lonely because they don't have friends and they just don't fit in? Or how hard is it to be with their sadness when they really want to do something that they love, but their brain just won't let them? When you're faced with your child's daily struggles, it stirs up huge emotions in you: grief, fear, powerlessness. But you still have to function, so your nervous system bottles it up or avoids it just to get through the day. And then when your child has another volatile emotional storm, you find you just don't have the tolerance for it. You snap, you shut down, you just can't take anymore. This is one of the hardest parts of parenting a hypersensitive high needs child. How do we hold space for their big emotions when we haven't learned to hold our own? And that's what we're going to talk about today: how to build the capacity to feel your own emotions so you can meet your child's big emotions with more calm, clarity, connection, and the nervous system tolerance to ride out their biggest storms. And I want to start by sharing a moment from my life that really opened my eyes to all of this. It was 3 months into my son being housebound for the first time. He wouldn't go outside, not even in the backyard. So one day he said to me, "Mommy, I miss going for drives. I want to go." And I saw this glimmer of hope in his eyes, but then it quickly faded. And he said, "But I can't." I told him, "I know your brain won't let you right now, but one day it will." It sounded comforting, but I realize now it was me avoiding my own fear, grief, and powerlessness. I used the old strategy I learned growing up: just reframe the pain into hope. So that day I went back to my routine, pushing the emotional wave down so that I could function. But by evening, I was irritable. I was angry at the spatula that sprayed food and made a mess, and the dish that slipped from my hand while I was washing dishes. Everything was annoying me. And then that night, I just needed chips, even after eating a big dinner. So I took the bag of chips, I lay on the couch, and I zoned out on TV. And it felt like bliss, a little mini getaway. But the next morning, I woke up heavy again, carrying emotions I never let myself feel. And when my son got anxious or angry that day, I had no space for his emotions because I hadn't made space for my own. And my nervous system just automatically went into avoidance patterns and behaviors to shut down my emotions. You see, these were not random behaviors, they were protective nervous system patterns. My system had learned to avoid vulnerable emotions like grief, powerlessness, shame, sadness. And over time, that avoidance built up more emotional load in my body, leading me into more shutdown, which is the dorsal vagal response of the nervous system, leading to more exhaustion, and then cycling back into more reactivity. The more intense things got at home with my son, who was just housebound for even longer periods of time and not going to school and was unable to do things that he used to love doing, the more my nervous system was automatically shutting down all the vulnerable emotions that were getting triggered. And eventually I found myself cycling between anxiety and anger and then deep shutdown. I was snapping at my husband more, isolating from my friends. I didn't want to see anyone. And I was always just trying to numb out. I developed more physical symptoms too, like chronic tension in my body, headaches, digestive upset, fatigue, and burnout. I couldn't even feel joy or hope anymore. I was feeling more and more depressed. Because what happens is when you numb the hard emotions, you also end up numbing the good ones too. And so this is the big challenge, is that if you want to heal your nervous system and be a more regulated parent, then you need to feel. And because if you don't feel, then you don't heal. So avoiding emotions actually keeps your nervous system stuck. And we don't want a stuck nervous system that's cycling between sympathetic fight or flight and then dorsal freeze or shutdown. We want a flexible nervous system that can move through waves of activation and emotion and come back to balance or come back to the ventral vagal system of calm and rest, repair, digest, and this feeling of I'm safe now. But my nervous system was not doing that. I was getting stuck in activation or numbing out. And I started to see that this old pattern of being so intolerant to feeling these vulnerable emotions was actually making things worse. So, where do these patterns come from? So, I'm just going to go into the ways that these patterns come in from, so that these patterns come from, so that you can understand this. So, first is early developmental experiences that we have with our caregivers. So, this is about how did our caregivers handle our emotions? When we had big emotions as kids, how did they show up in the face of our emotions? How did they handle our emotions? And the way that they handled our emotions is what gave us this subconscious framework of how to handle our own emotions. So if they couldn't tolerate our feelings and our big emotions, then we learn that it's not okay to feel them. And this is how we build an intolerance to our own emotions. So here are some examples of how this can happen. So we're a child and we're upset and we're crying, say we're really young, right? And so our caregivers would end up giving us milk or food when we were upset, even after we had just eaten. So then what could we learn from this? We may learn that I soothe my emotions by feeding them. Okay. Another example is if we were left alone to cry it out, then we learn it's too hard to feel emotions on my own, so I push them down, or I shut them down, or I dissociate from them. Or if I was told, oh, don't cry, you're fine, I learn that my emotions don't matter and they're not real, and I get confused about my emotions. And if my caregivers responded with anger to my tears or my anxiety, or they responded to anger to my own anger, then I learn that I lose love and connection if I have these emotions. The second way that intolerance for emotions can develop is from trauma or overwhelming stress. So when we face overwhelming experiences without any support when we were young, then our emotions get stuck and trapped in the body. Our system learns that feeling emotions equal threat. Okay, so it has no choice but to defend by numbing or shutting down or dissociating. So number three, the third way that we become intolerant to emotions is that these patterns are passed down through the family system. And this can be seen as generational trauma. So just take a moment to think of how your family and your extended family members may handle intense emotions. Okay, so notice during intense emotional moments, and maybe you're talking about something you're upset about, and what do they say? Maybe they say things like, oh, just think positive. This is something that I got a lot of growing up. Oh, just think positive. Or they make jokes. They use humor to cover up the pain as a strategy to avoid the emotion. Or you may have had parents or caregivers that show low-grade anger or even angry outbursts instead of vulnerability. Okay. Or they may even have totally just ignored your emotions when they were present. So as children, we absorb these strategies like sponges, okay, without even realizing it. It's very subconscious. Okay. Number 4 is cultural conditioning. Okay. What does culture teach us? Oh, be strong. Don't cry. You're too sensitive. Hide your emotions. Don't be weak. Okay. And although anger may be more accepted in our culture because it just tends to be more common to show anger, you're also shamed for showing anger if you're a woman. Okay. And then there's the cultural messaging to help us escape our emotions, right? By glorifying busyness, glorifying consuming more, showing you to stay how ways to keep staying productive and busy. And all of this is to avoid stillness because stillness brings up feelings. And then the last reason why tolerating emotions is so hard is due to our lack of interoceptive awareness. Okay. And this is our ability to feel the body and be in the body and track sensations in the body. And many of us never learned how to feel or track what's happening inside of our bodies. And without that skill, we can't process or release emotions. So for me, emotions would creep in. My mind would automatically shut them down before I even knew they were present. And then I just turned to these avoidance patterns like low grade anger, agitation, food, scrolling, doing, all to avoid feeling. And these patterns just built more stress, more overload, and more nervous system inflexibility. So the reality is our children have extreme emotions, right? And if we want to teach them true regulation and how to feel safe with their own activation and emotions, then we need to feel safe with ours first. So the nervous system learns most easily by observing the other nervous system. No words needed. Okay. There's communication with neuroception, our scanning detection system. There's always communication going on between nervous systems. And we learn from this nervous system language. No words needed. So when you can show up as, I'm okay with what's getting triggered inside and I know how to contain it, then this shows up to your child as, oh, my mom can handle this and feel safe with it. So I can learn to feel safe with this big emotion too. So I remember how my son's rage scared him. He would end up putting a hole in the wall. And, when he was having this intense panic rage moment, and I could then see the fear on his face of what he just did because he could not control it. So he was afraid of his own intense emotions, but I could not hold space for his feelings because I could not hold space for my own that were getting triggered. So let's get into what avoidance patterns can look like so you can notice the avoidance patterns your nervous system goes into in order for you to not feel emotion. So here are some behavioral signs that your nervous system may be trying to bypass feeling emotions. You rarely cry or you feel embarrassed when you do. Or your thoughts hijack you when you try to feel or when you try to be in the body at all or when you try to come to stillness. Okay. You avoid sad music or films. This was me. You rush to positivity when others are emotional. Always tell me, oh, but what about this positive thing over here when they're, in an emotional moment? Or you get angry or you walk around with low grade anger and agitation, getting angry at the things around you. Or you numb out on food or TV or social media, doom scrolling. Or you say to your kids, oh, you're fine when they're anxious or when they're upset. Or you stay busy all the time. Or when you explode, you don't know why you exploded. So you've actually surprised yourself because it felt like it was out of nowhere and you're shocked at your own reaction. Or you overthink and analyze everything. So this is intellectualizing everything. You stay in your head a lot. Or you live with chronic anxiety or depression or body symptoms. Okay, so we also have body-based signs that come up that can show that we're bracing against feeling emotions. And this can be a chronic tight neck or shoulders. This can, the chronic tight neck and shoulders can be seen as trying to cut your head off from feeling your body, right? Separating your mind from your body so you don't feel your body. Sometimes you can have chest tightness when there's fear or grief. So you may not feel the emotion, but you may feel the chest tightness. Or you can have jaw clenching or jaw tension, jaw issues like TMJ because you're holding back a lot of anger. You can also have gut tension or stomach issues or lower back tension and pain. And then a bracing feeling in your body, in general, your body is just bracing, trying to hold back the emotional flood. So if you go into any of these patterns, there's no shame in this. Your nervous system is doing what it's designed to do to protect you. And the brain is also designed to defend against emotions too. This is a natural part of our designs. Okay, so why does the brain defend against emotions? I always wonder that, like, why don't we have a brain designed to help us with emotions? Why is it, there to defend against emotions? And it's because emotional pain lights up the same brain regions as physical pain. So we feel emotions as real pain. And that's why if you do have physical pain, by the way, it can be exacerbated by emotions. Okay, and these defenses, they exist in our brain to protect us from when we have really overwhelming experiences. And the defenses are there to help us to numb down the emotions so that we can get through that wounding situation. So that makes sense, right? So an example is if you're a kid at school and you get bullied, right? Or if you've had an abusive trauma situation as a young child and there was no one there to help you through it, or no one there to help you process what happened at the time, then, during that school day or during that abusive situation, you had to lock it down. And this makes sense. We don't want to feel all that pain while we're going through it. So the brain is smart, it locks it down. But then the defenses are only meant to be temporary. And once we're actually in a safe environment with safe caregivers, the defenses are meant to come down and the emotions are meant to be processed and released from the body. And then we come back to feeling safe. But what if we grew up in a wounding environment? What if we never felt safe enough to let the defenses down because we didn't have a safe caregiver who we could, let our defenses down to, who accepted our emotions? Then what happens? Then emotions can just feel dangerous all the time, right? Or at least until you heal that pattern. So the other thing is that I want to mention is about the hypersensitive brain and nervous system. So some of us, and this is our kids, okay, we're born with highly sensitive systems, and they have a highly sensitive brain and a nervous system from the get-go. And this might be us too as parents, okay? Whether you're neurodivergent or just, identify as highly sensitive. So in this case, all sensations and emotions, which show up as sensations and sensory stimuli in the body, they just become too much for the brain. The brain can't process that so much. So when you're hypersensitive or highly sensitive, you just feel a lot more, right? So it becomes too much for the brain, and the brain will go into defense mode automatically to try to shut them down, or it will go into offloading mode to try to get that load out of the body, right? And this makes sense for a hypersensitive brain. The other thing I also want to acknowledge here is that if you're living with a child right now who is really struggling and activating many times a day, and you don't have the time and space or permission to let the guard down and feel all the feels, then you may need your avoidance patterns right now. And that's okay, Because some of us are, when I went through this really, really intense period with my son where it was constant activations every day for months on end, it was really hard for me to be with and process my emotions. So just understand that if you're living in a very intense situation right now, you might need your avoidance patterns, but even just beginning to notice these patterns that protect you from feeling can be healing, okay? Because as you notice them, you can be with them, become the awareness of them, and you can thank those patterns for protecting you. And that alone can create more safety in your nervous system, okay? So even if you're in an intense environment, you can still bring safety to your nervous system in that way, in terms of feeling emotions. Okay, so for those of you whose environments may not be so intensely volatile on a daily basis, perhaps you can go inside and ask, are these patterns still needed? Okay, are they still helping, or are they hurting you now and mounting more emotional load and leaving you more reactive? Okay, because moving towards greater emotional capacity is the difference between reacting versus responding. Okay. Without emotional capacity, the triggers will rule you. But with emotional capacity, you stay present, you connect more deeply, you can begin healing your trauma, and you can show up regulated for your child. So let's start to go into reclaiming emotion. Okay. So first, I just want to tell you that for years, the only place I could cry was my car. Okay. Was a period of a few years. The only place I could cry. I would purposely put on a sad song to help get the tears coming and then, get them flowing. Okay. And then it would give me sort of a space where I could cry. And then the crying would have to end because I would be, have to get out of the car. And now what I find is I can be with my emotions more freely. So it's more easy for me to cry, when I'm doing sessions with myself or even crying in nature. That's really, nature is so supportive for me because nature is flow, and that flow really supports my healing. So I encourage you to find those little spaces where you can allow yourself to feel. And if it's tears, allow those tears to come. Okay, start small. That's all it takes. You could even start by just watching a show. And when it triggers emotions within you to cry, can you allow those tears to come forth? But with awareness now, right? And notice that these tears are here, not really for the show, but for something else that was, you know, bottled up and trapped within you from before, right? And can you be with these tears with compassion? And sometimes it's easier to feel when you're removed from, the actual situation, or you're removed from thinking about what you're actually sad about. So sometimes we have to start from a situation removed, and that's okay. So here are the steps to rebuilding capacity to tolerate and feel your emotions so that you can tolerate and be okay with your child's big emotions. So the first step to healing emotional avoidance patterns is to recognize the pattern itself when it shows up. Okay, so we're not going straight to the emotion. First, we're working with the protective patterns around the emotion. And so when you notice the pattern is there, like zoning out on food or social media or TV, just notice it with awareness and allow that pattern to be there and get curious about it. Become the watcher of this pattern with no judgment, just curiosity, and without trying to change it. That's the first step. Because that awareness alone of just being with and watching this pattern can help you get some space from the pattern itself, right? To be with it instead of taken over by it. Then you can see that you are not this pattern. It's a survival pattern trying to protect you. Then you can ask, as you start to observe this pattern and you feel the urge of this pattern and what it's trying to do, you can ask inside to that pattern, what are you trying to protect me from feeling? Okay. And then the answer you will get is the emotion that it's trying to avoid. And this will help you to gain insight without having to change anything for now. Okay. So that's the first practice you can do. And if you live in a really volatile, intense environment right now, maybe you just stop there with that practice. Okay. But also, when the emotion is present and you have access to the emotion, the next step is to notice where you feel this emotion in the body, right? So we want to start being comfortable with being in the body with the emotion. So can you notice the sensations of this emotion and then see if you could tolerate being with it for a few moments? The key here is to slow down and give yourself time and space to become present with this emotion, even if just for a few seconds or minutes. But the other key here is to make sure that you do not force yourself to stay with the painful, intense emotion if it feels like too much, because you don't want to end up dissociating. Okay, that's counter to healing. So allow yourself to touch into the emotion, to feel it, and then allow yourself to take breaks from it and come out of it, come out of that feeling and orient to the present moment, to the space around you by noticing something that brings you comfort. Okay, so you can orient your head and neck around the room slowly. You can name 5 to 10 things, or just let your eyes land on something that brings you comfort and allow yourself to feel that in your body instead. Okay, so this is the safe way to teach your body and brain that you can tolerate intense emotions, but not by pushing through it and staying with it and having this big cathartic experience, but by touching into it and then coming out of it and then touching into something more neutral and comforting. Okay, so you can go back and forth with that practice. Okay, and this gentle back and forth is called pendulating. And it teaches the body that feeling big emotions can be safe and that it builds capacity for the body to tolerate these intense emotions. Okay, so number 3, if you can tolerate being with the big emotions, then you can also bring an experience of safety and care to that emotion. Okay, so here's the understanding, or the thing to take in here, is most of our emotions are trapped and incomplete emotions from past traumas. Okay, so can you bring a new experience of safety and care to this emotion that never got this when you were young? Perhaps that you can bring a gentle, soothing caress to your face or to your arms, or a soft hand on the heart, or a little whisper inside to this emotion. I see you. I hear you. I'm here for you. So start small. You could even set a timer, or you can put on a sad song and let yourself feel and cry. And when the song is over, you can move on and let that protective pattern take over again. Okay, but do this with awareness. That's the key. And being the watcher instead of being fully taken over by the emotion and having this big cathartic experience. Okay, so number 4 is building capacity. That over time, as you do this practice, right? So the ongoing work is really to slowly build tolerance for these intense emotions. And each time you allow an emotion in and you can stay with the pain of it for a little bit longer, you know, can you do that? Can you try that just a little bit longer? Can you tolerate being with it without dissociating, right? And if you dissociate, then you've gone, it's too much and you need to go back to shorter bits. But can you tolerate being with it, but with the help of care and compassion, right? So if you bring that care and compassion to it, you're bringing your ventral vagal system to it, okay? Because many emotions we feel today when triggered by our children are actually from past traumas where no one was there to support you through it and you felt all alone. So the only choice you had back then as a child was to go into dorsal shutdown and lock it all away. But now as an adult, can you show up for these emotions with more gentleness, care, and compassion? And can you imagine that it's this little child inside of you and you're bringing in a new experience of safety in the face of these emotions, okay? Because when you can do this, then your nervous system learns it's safe to feel and that someone is here for me now. And that someone is you, your true self, showing up for this trapped, emotion of this young part of you. Okay, so this felt sense of safety and care we can bring to our inner experience now changes the internal wiring in the nervous system and moves it towards greater safety and regulation in the face of vulnerable emotions. Okay, so when you can hold space and care for your own emotions, then the journey of parenting a hypersensitive high needs child becomes less intense and more tolerable. Okay, so the space, to And then, okay, also beneficial emotions, right? We want to feel those beneficial emotions. And what happens is that those beneficial emotions like happiness and joy, right? For all the little moments of true connection we have with our child, those can begin to emerge again too. Because when you can feel all of the non-beneficial emotions, the more vulnerable ones, then you begin to also be able to feel the more beneficial ones as well. And helping your nervous system bounce back and become more resilient to handle the next challenge with greater ease is what happens as you allow yourself to feel these emotions with safety and care. And you become this human who can handle all of the intensities of life, right? And so, the biggest practice I think is really to be able to allow all that is, right? To allow that your emotions are here, allow that your child's big emotions are here, be present with them. And when you allow all that is, what it does is it teaches your nervous system that even though this is hard, I can be with this and I can be okay. And this is how we build resilience, okay, to be able to then handle the next challenge with greater ease. And this is how we become the regulated presence that our child needs. So it's when our true self can show up for the hurting little one inside who holds all of those trapped emotions. That's when the healing begins. And a new experience of safety emerges in the face of challenging emotional experiences. And this is the greatest gift that you can give to your child, okay? The ability to feel, to heal, to grow, to feel safe with emotions. And that's by you learning to do it for yourself first, okay? And that gift, it doesn't end with them, right? It lives on with them, it lives on in them, and it ripples outwards to others and into future generations.